Today is Wednesday, February the 27th, 2019. We are at the Fairmount Heights Library located in Fairmount Heights, Maryland with Lawrence Brooks III. I am LaDonna Smith, here to conduct an oral history interview for the Sojourner Truth African American Research Room Speak Your Truth Oral History Project. Mr. Brooks, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so, tell me about growing up in Fairmount Heights.
Well, as you know, my name is Lawrence Brooks. I come from a family that's been raised and reared in Fairmount Heights for years. Okay, so like I said, I grew up in Fairmount Heights at a time when my grandparents were here, my aunts and uncles, my mother, and through my parents, I have a lot of these things I heard from them when they were coming up in Fairmount Heights. There were, in Prince George's County, there were only two schools that African Americans could attend. It was Douglas or Fairmount Heights. So that in itself had a lot of significance for me, because in hearing that and growing up in Fairmount Heights, it kind of made me really think about the times and what was going on. I can remember, I guess my first vivid memory is, as you know, Martin Luther King was killed in '68. I can remember being in the car with my father, and we were going up Eastern Avenue, the street that divides both Prince George's County and D.C. on the Fairmount Heights side, as well as the D.C. on one side. And I can remember the police officers from Prince George's County lined up on the border, and nothing was happening on the Prince George's County side, but everything was going on the district side. So in essence, they were like, you can do whatever you want on that side of the border, but you're not going to come over here and do it. So for me, that was a powerful memory. And I was strange. I was talking to my dad about this last week, because I told him about this interview, and he said, "Wow, you remember that?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I wouldn't have thought you would remember that." He said, "Because I didn't want you to see that." And it was so strange that their memories so vivid. Even today, I was telling my daughter about it. I was telling her about me doing this interview. I kind of explained to her. I said, I'm a little nervous. I said, I really don't know what I'm going to say or what the format's going to be or what we're going to talk about. And I was telling her about some of these things, and her mouth was just open, like, really? And I was telling her, in this town, I can remember, the exact sure of the date, the dedication of this library. My grandfather, as you know, Lawrence Brooks Sr., was the mayor. And they were dedicating this library, and they were doing the groundbreaking. And I can remember that. That's a vivid memory. Where this library currently stands, there used to be a Jewish guy that had a store on the very back street that I lived on 59th Avenue. And as a little kid, I could walk to his store and buy candy and walk back home.
Do me a favor, you said that you can remember the day the library was dedicated. And, you remember that there was a store beforehand.
Yeah.
Describe that feeling. We have a library in our community. This is the only one within this region so far. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was, growing up in Fairmount Heights, Great place to grow up. There weren't a lot of things like this in Fairmount Heights. So when this library opened, this library was huge because it gave us an additional outlet to come and to kind of gather and hang out. So when this library came, this library became a focal point for us to go kind of hang out at. It actually, I can remember my dad and I, him sitting, he and I on that very first floor, first level, sitting there helping me do my homework. So it was a focal point for the community, and I think for me, it kind of said things were going on in Fairmount Heights. Again, as a little boy, I can remember when we were doing all the urban renewal, they were restoring the communities and stuff. A lot of this area were dirt roads. And it's strange. People say, "How do you remember all?" I don't consider myself to be that old, but I can remember where this town was dirt roads. It was like the Wild Wild West around here when it would rain. So it was. So again, all those memories, great memories. I have friends for life that I could see them. I see them to this day, and you would think we're 8, 10 years old again, because we just reminisce. So, for that I love Fairmount Heights. Initially, I went to Fairmount Heights Elementary School, where one of our, and that was the time where we knew everyone. The principal lived up the street, Mr. Gray. He went to Grace United Methodist Church. I could, when I went to church, I seen my high school principal. I seen my elementary school principal. In this day and time, that's just something you don't see anymore. He was friends with my grandparents. So so that goes back when you hear people talk about African American black communities where everything was right there. Fairmount Heights was that community. Right up here in Chapel Oaks, a community right outside Fairmount Heights. The doctor was here, Dr. Robertson. Now, he was our doctor. So everything that we did, in Fairmount was here. I lived on the corner, right a block from this library. I could walk here. I could interact with my friends, and I walked to elementary school. I used to actually climb over one of my neighbor's fence and climb under the fence to get to school. I never walked on the main strip. Always would climb over the fence, go through her yard, slide under the fence to get to school, to get to elementary school. So that's something you don't hear anymore. And I did that, and going home the same route, slide back under the fence, went through her yard, and she would see me, and nothing would be said. Oh, that's that boy here. Oh, he's going home. That's just a different day and time. I think we've lost that. Where we were actually a community where I felt comfortable, and all of my neighbors, I could go in their yards, and they didn't think I was stealing anything. They didn't think I was doing anything illicit. If we were playing in the yard and in the street, a ball was in the yard, I'd jump the fence and go get it. And that was expected.
You mentioned that you had a lot of friends. What are some of the things that you guys did for fun around Fairmount Heights?
Well, we, as you know, a lot of kids, you know, we had bikes. We've built, you know, configured our own little skateboards, roller skates. You know, we would take one bike and have pieces and make three bikes out of it. You know, and that's something that you don't hear kids doing anymore. You know, and we had basically the run of the whole community, from Jefferson Heights to Cedar Heights to, you know, we could run. We had access to the whole community, and everyone knew who we were. Everyone, all the parents knew who the kids were. You know, you would go down the street. That's that Brooks boy. That's that Cole boy. That's that. You know who he is. You know that boy can't hide. He try to act like he doesn't know who I am. He know who I am. Wait till I see his mother. You know, I'm gonna tell her. You know, and I can remember as a little kid coming through, walking through these communities, walking through Fairmount Heights, and I just felt safe. You know, like I said, I knew Jeff Johnson, the police officer. All of us were friends. You know, I knew his kids. You know, I would hang out at their houses. So, you know, I felt in this community, I felt that, you know, I could go anywhere. You know, I didn't feel any restrictions. I didn't feel anything that we couldn't do, you know. And if we were out of line, as the old adage was, you know, we would get our neighbors would straighten us out.
So we talk about the good things. I'm hearing some of the things you talk about. Were there anything other than the Martin Luther King day, you know, the day that he was assassinated? Was there anything else historical or anything else that really is embedded in your brain, you know, in your memory, that's like, this is something I will never forget? This may have changed your life, or just something that may have impacted you. Is there any memory that you have that's like that about Fairmount Heights?
I do. Again, you know, Fairmount Heights was a place that, like during Memorial Days and all those times, I can remember this town, we had parades. And, you know, I looked forward to those parades. You know, they had marching bands and all of those things. And again, you know, those things are so impactful because, you know, we live now in an environment where you just don't see interaction like that. You know, and I think that has so much of an impact. And it impacted me so much that I often tell my daughters and my nieces and nephews about growing up in this little town. You know, you would think this was it was a small town, but for me it was as big as New York City, because people cared about you. And I think that I would the interactions I have with people, like I said, the local churches, we would all partner up. We would do different things, and it was such a this. Like I said, this was such a great place to grow up. I've even, when I left, considered coming back, but you know, life catches up with you. Different things happen. But this was such a great town, and what I understand, it still is a pretty good place to be. I don't know, it's strange that you and I are having this conversation. I just happened to be over here a couple of weeks ago, haven't been, like I said, probably haven't been in this library in over 20 years. For some reason, I stopped in here, and I met a woman at the desk, and she told me about the oral interviews and stuff. And I told her that I wanted to be a part of it, and I was telling my daughter, I said, I really don't know what I would have to add to that conversation. I said, because I really don't think that there's a lot to add. But as I think about it, there are so many memorable events that have occurred in my life that's been a part of this town or people in this town. I've to give you one example, there was a friend of mine that we grew up together in this town. I'm all the way across the country in Denver, Colorado. He grew up and moved out. I haven't seen him in 15 years. Of all places, I've run into him in the airport at Denver, Colorado. And we grew up here in Fairmount Heights. What's the chances of that happening? That you run into someone, you all the way across the country, and yet we live 5 miles from each other. I never see you, but I run into you in the airport, in the Pacific, so it's just, again, how can you beat that?
Now, just kind of piggybacking off of that, was it like surreal? Was it like, oh my, where, that pride in the hometown? Like, what was that feeling like when you saw that gentleman in the airport? What was that like?
It was a great feeling because, again, I'm in an environment where I didn't know a lot of people. I was just haven't been out of high school that long. I tell you a little bit about my background. I joined the Air Force. I was in the Air Force, not being away from home, don't know a lot of people, and to run into someone that you know. And it was a great feeling to see them, and you're in a place where you feel so isolated that you're kind of by yourself, and to run into from someone from your hometown, it's a great feeling. And that's, I don't know, it makes being away, it made it that much easier.
So let's talk about your granddad a little bit.
Okay.
Like I said in the beginning, you're Lawrence Brooks III.
Yes.
So tell us, we know the public figure Lawrence Brooks, but just for those who may not, may have not been properly introduced or acquainted, let's talk about Granddad. Is that what you call him?
Yeah, Granddad. Yeah, that's what we called him.
Okay.
And he wasn't. It's strange. As I said, he was a man of many. I would call him complicated because he grew up in an environment where there weren't a lot of opportunities. I don't know if you know the story. He grew up where, as a young man, his parents were killed in the train accident. So it was just him and his brothers. That was during the Depression era. They had to go out and make their way. And it was tough for them, and I appreciate that growing up, so many of the things that I do are based on, it becomes a little emotional for me. So many things I do in my life are based on things that he taught me. I've learned to make the most out of things. I've I've learned to, you know, he was a catalyst for me to get all the education that I could. He was the man that didn't have a lot of education himself, but if you know anything about him, he raised to great heights for a man not to have a lot of education. You know, again, he was he worked for the State Department. He was the mayor of this town, Fairmount Heights. He became the first African American to be appointed to the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission, later to become the chairman. And I don't know if you even know this, that he was appointed by Larry Hogan, not the current governor, but his father had appointed him to be the commissioner. And so, you know, that in itself had kind of, for him, that was such a thing. You know, he ran for other public offices, but I think that being the first was important for him. And at that time, it was, if I'm not mistaken, that was 1972. Different day and different time. You know, again, growing up in Fairmount Heights has meant a lot. You know, we were in the early 70s when busing was first occurred. They closed down Fairmount Heights Elementary School, and they sent us out to Hollywood Elementary and College Park. So, in essence, all the time I told you, as a younger guy, I would run through the neighbor's yard, climb under the fence, and go to class. That was over with. I had to catch a bus from here on. I had to catch a bus to school. And that really was interesting because they would we were bused out to a school where we knew very few people. And that was different. You know, that was different for us. You know, like I say, we come from a community since I was 3 or 4 years old, I could always walk to school. You know, my mother felt comfortable enough. This community was, and at the time, the world was safe enough where she can allow me to walk to school.
So you mentioned that. How has Fairmount Heights, with you coming back and visiting us, how has it changed? What difference? I know you may not be able to, you know. Well, no, I'm gonna let you tell it. How has it changed? How has the atmosphere?
What I've seen that, and I'm glad to see. I've seen a lot of newer houses being built. I see a lot of. I still, from time to time, when I do come over this part of the world, I still run into old friends. I still have family that's here. So I'm glad to see that so many people have stayed. And I'm glad to see the progress that it's making. Like, for instance, this library, this is a great facility. You know, I when I first, it was, you know, it was new, it was modern when they first built it. But as time came, it needed a facelift, and it looked like it's gotten it. And I'm glad to see that it's being utilized. You know, I would have. It was really a little bit more than I was expecting. So. So I'm glad to see that. Again, you know, I'm not over here a lot, but I still come here to visit family, and and quite frankly, I still kind of get the same feeling. It's still seems to be very tranquil still. When I come here at different times, I'm still not, still feel very comfortable about being around here. I still feel that Fairmount Heights is a good place. You know, I don't, you know, I haven't been much. I don't know much about the politics of it, or what goes on, or what goes on a lot in this town. But I'm sure, like any other town, there are politics. You know, and it's I'm sure it can get interesting as well. But I still think the bones are still here. The infrastructure and the things that I knew growing up, just from friends and family members I talked to, that's still here. I on my way here, I was sitting there. I came up past Ebony Inn, and I said, "Wow, a lot of these things that when I grew up, they're still here." So that's a testament to kind of the staying power, you know. And I kind of drove through the community. I see some of the churches are still here, and a lot of those groups are still here, and I hope that they are active in the community. I see, but I was just proud just to see this time of day, just to see this many people in the library this time of day, you know. And I don't know of a lot of libraries that are nestled in communities. So I think that's a positive for this community. Again, I'm sure you probably have a lot of interviews that you're doing, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who have a lot of things to say. You know, one of the things I was talking to my father about doing this interview, and he was telling me, he said, "Do you know that during the 60s and stuff, that the town hall was used to house some of the freedom riders?" I said, "The what?" I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You know, they used to, we would clear the town hall out, and people would sleep there." And I was like, "That's interesting." And then I think about it. You know, when I lived here as a little boy, my mother used to manage a group called a teen club, and that group they would have dances on the weekends, and we would go to movies, and you know, and I just happened to was able to go because my mother was part of the group, and you know, a lot of them were a little older, and I would happen to be right with them, and it was, again, you know, a town that people looked out for each other. And I can't say enough, again, you know, about the feeling of the tranquilness I had of being in this community. I always felt very comfortable here growing up. And I always made it a point, no matter where I was in life, to come through here sometimes just to see what's going on. You know, and I'm going to continue to do that. And it seemed to be there great strides are being made, because I'm looking at the newer houses I see in this community. I'm looking at some of the things I see going on. It seems like this is seems like Fairmount Heights is going to be a pretty exciting place to live in the future.
I'm glad you said that, because you had just kind of like summarizing the last statements that you were making about the feeling of tranquility,
Yeah.
a sense of being at home, a sense of being able to come through the town and get a recharge. What is something that, if we were doing this oral history interview, let's say 50 to 100 years from now, what is something that you would want to make sure that is embedded into Fairmount Heights history from Lawrence Brooks III's standpoint?
Well, again, I would like for them to remember that that this was a town that, that my, kind of for selfish reasons, I want them to remember my family, and I want them to remember that this was a town that, even though it's on the border of D.C., it's that we're go-getters, that a lot of successful people have came out of this town, and I think a lot of people have come through here, and a lot of people, now we're looking at, everything that I have and all the values that I've had, even though I'm not in this town, I'm trying to implant in my kids. Same values, same things I grew up, and the reason, and I'm doing that based on part of my experiences in this town. So I think that what people need to realize is that while Fairmount Heights is not New York, but it's my New York. It's where I'm from, where I'm proud of, and I take it wherever I go. I can move to Paris. I'm still going to talk about Fairmount Heights. I'm just not going to forget this place. I'm not.